Welcome to God at Work. I am Ronna May, and I'm here with Jerry Palladino of Beyond Compare Ministries, and we're really glad that we can be with you again here today. The stories that we have to share today are God working in some of the most unusual places in people's lives. So from the garbage dump, as it says, right up to mega churches built in slum areas. But it's amazing how God moves. He doesn't care whether you're in some big, huge, fancy building or whether you're out in the middle of a garbage dump. He is busy working, changing hearts, touching lives. So I hope you enjoy the stories this morning and that you will let them sink into your heart and see what God will do. Please let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for all that you desire to speak to us today, Lord. Lord, samples that you desire to give us, ways that you desire not only to touch our hearts, but touch lives through us, Father. So have your perfect will in this time we have together. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
You've got somebody who loves you. Ain't it good to know you've got somebody who cares? Ain't it good to know you've got somebody who needs you when no one else even knows you're there? It's like a cool wind that blows, refreshing your soul. Like a spring rain that falls, bringing life to all. And you look around, and that love abounds. Ain't it good to know you've got somebody who loves you? Ain't it good to know you've got somebody who cares? Good to know you've got somebody who needs you when no one else even knows you're there. Through the dark clouds of sorrow, you see the bright day of tomorrow. And as the clouds begin to clear, someone who loves you is near to wipe your tears away. And you hear them say, qué lindo es saber que alguien te ama. Qué lindo es saber que alguien se preocupa por ti. Qué lindo es saber que alguien te necesita cuando nadie más sabe que estás ahí. Oh, ain't it good to know, ain't it good to know you've got somebody who loves you. Ain't it good to know, ain't it good to know you've got somebody who cares for you. Ain't it good to know you've got somebody who needs you. Oh, when no one else even knows you're there. Yes, when no one else even knows you're there.
Ain't it good to know that you've got somebody who loves you? And the first part of today's message is a place where they really needed to know that somebody loved them. A city called Concordia, but quite a ways out of the city. A little garbage dump known as the village of El Silencio, because the people had made it into a little village. People were living right in the midst of this garbage dump. It was pretty crazy. But when we first were on our way there, we ran into all sorts of problems. We arrived in the middle of a strike. The strike was so crazy. Farmers were complaining because of their rights, etc., demanding their rights, and were blocking roads so cars could not go through. I mean, they had all their farm equipment literally blocked right across the road, and cars couldn't go through, but including cars not being able to get through, the trucks that carried all the gasoline to the gas stations, I mean, outside of Buenos Aires, outside of the city, they couldn't get through. And so the bus driver that was driving us from a city, one city, over to where we had to get that day, he was in line at the gas station, knowing that there was gas coming in at a certain time. He was in line all night long, waiting to get gas. But then he'd been told by our hosts that we had a deadline and he had to get us. It was a big, huge double-decker bus. There was 42 of us on this bus. And he had been told he had to get us to our destination by a certain time. But he'd been threatened, not by us, but by his boss, that if he didn't get us there on time, he probably wouldn't get paid. Well, we get up to this one roadblock and we're waiting and we're waiting. And all of a sudden, this bus does like a U-turn and heads over to the side of the road to an embankment. And we're looking at this wondering, what is he doing? And all of a sudden, we're heading down the embankment. Now, it wasn't a huge drop off, but it was quite an embankment. And we're heading down it. And the next thing you know, we're driving right through these farm fields to get around this roadblock. And there's all these people, adults and little kids alike, coming running out, waving and shouting and screaming as we are driving through their farm fields to get around the roadblock and carry on to our destination. But we got there with a few delays, but we got there in time to quickly have our dinner and we had an evening meeting that night. And then the next morning we were starting our major project, which was building a clinic in the midst of this garbage dump because people were dying because of very, minor infections that could have easily been healed. Minor infections. But because, they're literally sleeping in the garbage. There's broken glass and there's rusty metal and they're stepping on it, they're walking on it. A lot of them didn't have shoes. And so they're right in the middle of the garbage. And the mortality rate of children in that garbage dump was 600, and I think it was 676, but it could be 73, that were dying just because of these minor infections, or what started out minor, but they could not get to a place for care. They couldn't get from the garbage dump into the city, into a clinic. They didn't have transportation. It was far too far to walk, especially if they were sick. And so we built this clinic out in the middle of the garbage dump. And the mayor of the city actually called me and the host pastor into his office. I think there's a couple of others with us. We went in to meet him in his office. He wanted to thank us for doing this work. And he was talking about how it took people to come all the way from Hawaii. This was a mission team from Hawaii to come and serve and love these people. But the first day, they did not know how the people in the dump were going to respond to a group of foreigners coming in and invading their territory. Now, the host pastor had made arrangements with this one woman that lived in the dump with her kids. She had 6 children. She lived in the dump. And he'd made arrangements with her to use a piece of land that was right next to hers that she'd sort of staked out and kept an eye on until we got there. But we were told that the women and the younger ones, as well as any of the men that were not being involved in the actual construction, could not come the first day. The women were not allowed to go out there the first day. So they set up another project of a clinic fairly much in town, but in a very rural slum area. And it was an absolute disaster. Ceilings were caving in. The walls had mold and you name it growing all over them. So our team started out, you can show a picture of the ending of it, Jerry. Our team started out sanding the walls, painting the walls, doing all of the yard work, the clinic in town, the white one with all the people in front of it. And it was so incredible what happened. It all worked out. The neighbor across the street actually started coming. Ah, there it is. You see the walls are nice and white now. The grass is all trimmed up. That was weeds up to knee high or almost to your hips before. The walls were black from all the mold and moss growing on it. But it got cleaned up. The neighbor saw what we were doing for the clinic in his neighborhood and started bringing food and drinks over for us. He showed up at lunchtime. We had food on the bus ready for us, well, being prepared. And he said, no, no, no. He said, we want to supply. And they had made sandwiches for the whole team because they saw the work that was being done. That clinic became a very active clinic. People that couldn't go in because, I mean, it was in such state of disrepair. The water wasn't running. We had one of the guys that was a plumber fixing up the water running. The ceilings were all collapsing, and it was a disaster. But it ended up looking like a really beautiful little clinic. The entranceway, the walls, everything were all fixed up. But at that time, well, that half the team was there. All of the men involved in the construction headed out, picking up all of the needed supplies, and headed out to the dump. And they got out there, and there was one of the men, they had to go down and gather water for some of the projects. You can see the dump. It's just an absolute nightmare. This is what the kids are living in. That young guy there had staked out that land. That was going to be his territory. And one of our team members headed down to get water to help with some of the equipment for the project. And the stench was so bad because it was also their sewage. That's where they went to use as their bathroom. And he literally was sick to his stomach. It was so, so bad. But that's what they lived with every single day. That was their life. But the people just could not find a way out of the dump. They didn't know how to get to where they needed to be. They didn't know a way to get out. Families, mothers, young girls, 13, 14 years old, having babies. There was one girl that I think she was 14 and she'd had 6 children. No, sorry, 3 children, not 6. She'd have 3 children already by the age of 14. They had no training, they had no teaching, they had no school. And consequently, they were training each other. That was their way of making their way around. But the dump was all they knew. They didn't have any ways of playing or any toys to play with. They played with the garbage. That was their toys. They were throwing rotten oranges around as balls. We brought some toys with us. One of the team members was actually a football coach, and he brought a whole pile of soccer balls and was to help play soccer with the kids, and a lot of them, and he ended up giving balls to so they could play with them and have them and not have to use the garbage to play soccer with. But the children there were so incredible. They lived there. They did everything there. And you can see they live amongst the garbage. They live amongst the filth. A lot of them they didn't have shoes. We brought a bunch of clothes down. When we left the airport in Honolulu, we had a team of 42 people, and everyone on the team was told they could have one suitcase for their personal belongings, and the other suitcase was for supplies that we were taking down. One for the clinic and supplies that we were taking, clothing for the people. We took a bunch of vitamins down. We took medical supplies so we could clean basic wounds. We had a couple of nurses with us that were helping the others learn how to just clean basic wounds. And I mean, there was one kid, he had sores all over his body. He was literally sleeping in a bed of garbage to make it soft. That's how he was sleeping. But those kids, just a smile and seeing that somebody cared about them, changed their lives. They changed their lives. When you see that big guy there, that's my son, that's Carl. And when you see him with these little kids, it was so incredible. And He was like a big teddy bear. They would come running up and grab and hug one of his legs because that's as far as they could reach, because he's 6'5". But it just gave them a fresh breath of air away from the garbage, away from the dump. They were given clothes that were clean, and a lot of them were used, but a lot of them were also new. So they had fresh clothes to wear. Some of them got shoes, so they didn't have to actually walk on the broken glass and the metal. And the kids, you could see the difference from when we got there to later on in the trip. They were changed so completely. But it was amazing watching them. And all this time, while some of the team were playing soccer or playing games with the kids, others were helping make food for them, and others were playing with the kids at the same time, the construction project was going on the whole time. And we have a whole, right from beginning to end, this construction project, one of the guys there, Warren, he taught, construction and that type of thing in the college. And so he had all the means to make the design, and the project daily went up. We built this clinic in 3 days. The clinic was built from start to finish. And it ended up being such a blessing in that community. As I told you, there was 670 some odd deaths the year before. Once the clinic was built and we had doctors up there a couple of times during the week, and we had nurses manning it every single day, treating these treatable wounds that they just couldn't get to. The next year, there was only 6 deaths in the childhood deaths. That's all there was. So there was the clinic behind this fence that they'd built up so people could come and get the aid, get the help that they needed, and not have to die in the dump because they couldn't get to medical attention. But it impacted the city to such a degree that when I went to visit with the mayor, because he wanted to thank us, he also gave us a piece of land closer into town, but a piece of land that he wanted to be able to be used in some way, whatever we wanted to do with it, in some way for youth, rather than just hanging out on the street, that they would have somewhere that they could go where they were safe, where they didn't have to be in gangs, where they weren't involved with all of the drug issues that were going on. But the kids were so happy to see this building going up. You could see it on their faces. They were just so content watching this building go up, knowing that it was being done for them. Look at them. They're a lot of these kids, those are their new clothes that they got, clean clothes, new clothes. And 3 of the team members in the background there, loving them, encouraging them. But then they also had an issue of not having enough food to eat. And we had a barbecue. They have Argentinian barbecues are absolutely, they have the best meat in the world. But the kids and a lot of the adults, one of their very favorite things to eat is called a choripan. And it's like a piece of baguette bread sliced and a piece of chorizo sausage put into it. That is their favorite. It's like similar to our hot dogs, but made with these barbecued chorizo sausage put into it. And every single day, that's what we made them lunch, every single day. We had to be out of the dump before dark. That was the rule that we were given by the city because they figured it was too dangerous for us to be there any later. And we couldn't work on our construction project anyways. But the lives that were changed in that short time in that dump, watching them. And there was one of our team members, a man named Earl, that fell in love with one of these little boys. This little blonde, curly-haired little boy. Look at the big grin on Earl's face. He fell in love with that little boy. If he could have, if it was could have been worked out, he would have taken little Luca home with him to Hawaii and given him a very good education and training, but it just could not get worked out. So little Luca had to stay there in the dump. He's out of the dump now, I've heard, but into the town and struggling, of course, as most kids coming from that type of background. But every time Luca would see Earl coming off the bus, he would come running with his arms reaching up, wanting to get picked up and held. He'd not felt or seen love like that in his life, ever. And then, because of the change in these people's lives, with the help of our church that we worked with down there in Buenos Aires and what we could do to help, financially, a brick building business was set up. There they are with a bunch of their bricks. They had a little kiln there, and they were making and selling bricks to earn some money. And several of the families, because of this, were able to get out of the dump and get living quarters away from the garbage, away from the dump, get some of their kids into school. But this became a way of living, a way to survive for these people. But when we were finished our project there, we had to head to we ended up at a church in a city called Córdoba. And this church was in a very, very poor neighborhood. It was a very unusual structure. This giant, you could see it for miles, this giant yellow dome. Huge. And it was a vision that God had given the pastor to build this building. But they had no money. So they started letting the neighborhood know they were going to build this church here. But they needed supplies. They needed cement. They needed bricks. They needed sand. They needed gravel. They staked out the whole area for the building, and they started having meetings there before there was even a cement floor, before anything was there. They started holding their regular services right there. And then as cement and materials came in, they built the foundation, built the floor. They started building up the walls, and then they got up to the roof, wondering what they were going to do. And that roof didn't exist at the time. It was fiberglass, and it was a vision that the Lord had given Pastor Raul Villarreal as a way to put a roof, a dome over that. It's made with fiberglass. Those two guys standing up on the roof there were not supposed to be there, but I will never tell who two of them were. Well, they were both from my team, and they were exploring, looking around. One of them was my husband. I was about to kill him later because they were not supposed to be up there. It wasn't meant for climbing on. But anyhow, they wanted to see if there was anything up there. That was their reason. They wanted to see if there was anything that needed to be done up there. But then this church, after it was finished, they carried on their meetings. They started just meeting on the dirt, then on the cement foundation, and then as the walls were being, and then inside the dome, they started having their meetings. This pastor, Raul, he had their people out in the neighborhood. I saw an aerial picture of when it was time for a service. It was like little ants. There were so many just streaming along these little dirt roads to get to the building. And in they went. 18,000 people usually in their main services. You can see the double doors that you could see from outside. Well, there was a few of those around the building. And the people were crowded in the doorways and right outside the door where they could only hear. But they just packed in. It was standing room only. They only had chairs in that facility for the elderly and the very, very weak. That's the only chairs they put in there. There wasn't room to put a whole bunch of chairs. But people, it became the norm there. They didn't have the money or the means to go to a doctor, to go to a clinic when they needed healing. They knew that their resource was God. And it became the norm for them. Every service, people, blind eyes were opened, deaf ears were opened, back issues, knee issues, heart issues, they were all healed. Cancers that disappeared. And one service that I was there and I'd spoken, I went down to pray for people, and there was this man on a stretcher that some friends had brought. And he was yellow, like John, so yellow. I mean, his eyes were yellow, his whole body, everything was yellow. And I just started to pray for him. And it was like the norm for them. They expected that when you prayed for them, when they got prayer, they were going to be healed. They just expected it and believed it. And the next thing you know, this man gets up off of the stretcher, and he is walking off out of the room, out of the area. The meeting was over, and he left walking. not on that stretcher, completely healed. The whole yellow in his body, you could watch it. It sort of drained from the head on down. And the head became clear, the arms became clear, the legs became clear. And his whole body went back to normal coloring. Just amazing. That church, they expected and believed for miracles every single meeting, and they happened. I saw so many miracles take place in that church. Loved it. But I'm going to leave you here expecting and wanting more, because next week I'm going to bring you back to this same church, and you're going to see some of the projects. You know, they had that original domed building, and then they started, as supplies came in, building up another layer around that. And they built offices, and they built an area for children's ministry, and they built a kitchen area, and they built all sorts of things. And so when we were there, we ended up building a area for homeless and very poor seniors that had nowhere to go to get out of the cold. That area became very cold in the winter, and they needed somewhere to get out of the rain, get out of the cold. It was a church that had a vision to reach the community. They actually ended up starting their own. Raul, the pastor, he was a football player, manager for soccer players in Argentina. And you know Argentina and soccer. Any of you don't know anything about soccer in the world, Argentina was the fanatics. And so they had a soccer team that ended up playing in the national leagues. Consequently, they built an entire soccer stadium right there on their property. And the vision was incredible. So then we went back and we were painting the whole outside wall, inside wall, doing all of that. Plus, part of the team was building this not residence, but lounge for all of these seniors to come in and get out of the cold, get something warm to eat. And so we're going to carry on with that next week. And then we're going to head down into Buenos Aires with a bunch of the dumps down there and another mega church down there, so you can see what God was doing. It was so exciting. The church in Buenos Aires, when I first started going there, literally, the people, you could see them lined up around the block, waiting, not just in front of the building, but they would go to the corner, down the next street, and around, and sometimes they were coming all the way back, meeting up with that lineup at the door that were waiting to get in. And then they had to go all the way back and around to get into the building. Sometimes they had to wait 2 or 3 services. But that church had, at that time, they had 7 or 8 services a day, not a week, a day, 7 days a week. And those lineups were there in all of the busy times. So God bless you. Thank you for being with us. And I hope to see you next week for part 2 of From Dumps to Mega Churches, because those ones in the dump, their lives were changed, and the ones in the mega churches, their lives are changed. Doesn't matter where you are, God is there wanting to touch and change your life. Jerry has a song here, and it's really a beautiful song. It's called Love Will Reign. Love will reign one day. And for the people in that dump, that's what they needed, to know that God's love was there to reign. God's love was there to change. The people that were there in that mega church, coming in from a very, very poor area, they needed to know that love. And so they would come regularly because that's what they felt when they were there. So, Jerry, love will reign.
La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. I dreamed when I was young of a better world for all. I tried to do my part and live as if to say that love will reign one day. They fought it from the start, said it could not be done, that men would never change, and there could be no way that love would reign one day. But I cannot accept, much less believe, we're doomed to fail. So I fight on till we prevail. La 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la la la. I know some think me wrong, it's foolish, they may say. The evidence is strong, the world has gone astray, but love will reign one day. They say, don't be naive. Oh, they say, just open up your eyes. But I choose to believe what all the prophets say, that love will reign one day. And I cannot accept, much less believe, we're doomed to fail. So I fight on till we prevail. I'm old and wiser now, but this remains unchanged. No matter what comes down, what evil they create, or what they throw our way, the light is sure to rise. We'll see it day plain as day, shining in all eyes, when love is come to stay.
For those people in the dump, that love changed their lives. It changed the history of El Silencio. That little place, it was called El Silencio, which means in English, the silence, because it was a place that nobody wanted to talk about. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that El Silencio existed, but it did. You know, when I was telling you how all the team members had to bring one suitcase of supplies, but we still had about another, I think it was about 20 or 30 boxes over each team member having one box with them. And the airlines, after hearing what we were doing, they waived the excess baggage fee on all of those excess suitcases. It was so wonderful, another miracle that God did just as we were getting started. But the pictures that you've seen, I took some of them, but most of them were taken by different members of the Argentina mission team, and I'd like to thank them for those photos, just so they know that they were a part of what went on down there, a very large part. So lives were so touched and changed by people willing to come all the way from Hawaii And we went in winter in Argentina. So coming from hot Hawaii to the cold winter. And Buenos Aires winters and Argentina winters can become very, very cold. And they were willing to do that. One of the trips, actually, I found a company in Hawaii that made jackets for everybody. And they put our Argentina Mission logo on it and gave it to us at cost. So we got these really nice jackets that gave them some extra warmth down there in Argentina for everybody on the team. Ended up with one so that they didn't have to freeze, because some of them didn't have any coat when we were heading down there. The first time we had to find some. I had actually had to get the pastor in Buenos Aires to gather a few couple together for some of them. But it was amazing what God did. So I just want to pray and ask that God will speak to your hearts and give you a desire to let His love shine through you so that it too will reign in your area of the world, your part of the world. Father, I thank you right now that your love will reign in our hearts, in our lives, Father. And that as we are your hand extended, it will be extended to all those we come in contact with. Father, that your love will truly reign. No matter what's going on in the world around us, no matter what negativity is being spoken, Father, we know that your love will rule and reign. In Jesus' precious name, Father. Amen. Right now, if you have been touched and blessed and would like to contribute to the work that we're doing with Beyond Compare Ministries, please feel free to send a donation. Jerry's going to put a couple of ways that you can do it up online. The first one, the e-transfer, is for Canadians only. The other one, the PayPal you got all over the world. So the other one's PayPal, and you can send it from anywhere. But your gifts are greatly appreciated. God bless you. We'll hopefully see you next week.